because we don't want to feel something, and because we don't want to feel something, we create a whole heap of lies, upon which are the lies are the foundations of our fears, and the denial of our fears and the suppression of our fears are the foundation of our addictions, and our addictions not getting met is the foundation of our anger and rage, and all of that is happening because I'm just not choosing to feel. Eloisa.
On that, I've been in that state, and to reverse that, is it going back to the thing I didn't act on and starting to act in harmony with that? So it's about, sometimes it goes...
No, first it's about dealing with your refusal to grieve and to choose fear over your grief.
Yes, I need to feel that first.
So you need to see that you chose fear rather than grief, and why did you do that?
Yeah.
What grief was coming up that you chose to tell yourself lies about? Does that make sense? What grief came up that you chose to make the decision to lie to yourself about it so that you felt fear instead, and then you felt justified to act in the fear instead? Now, if you do that, now you're able to feel the grief. When you feel the grief, it will become natural for you to act in harmony with the love. You won't have to try to act in harmony with the love. It'll just be natural because there's no fear preventing you from acting in harmony with it anymore.
So you've got to find the grief first.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Your refusal to feel the grief shuts down the process of acting in harmony with the love. Yeah?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. This is why we had the discussion a few weeks ago about the nature of your fear and the nature of your rage.
Yeah.
Because if you can see, like today we're trying to pull it all together, right? And say, right, we've got all these false beliefs about God we have to deal with, all these false beliefs about love we have to deal with, and we need to understand the benefit of doing this. But if we receive some love and we're now feeling worse, it's because we're acting out of harmony with the love we've received. You know, nobody feels worse feeling love. You can only feel worse if you shut down your grief. You'll get to the point where it's relieving to feel your grief, and so you won't be so disturbed about feeling it, right? But up until that point, you've obviously got beliefs about your grief that are false. Otherwise, you'd be feeling it. You know, so what are the beliefs about your grief that are false? That comes up in the moment. Now that you received a bit more love, you'll start feeling your fears about acting in harmony with that love. And those fears will be the lies you tell yourself, not truths. They're the lies you tell yourself to avoid your grief of acting in harmony with love. Angela.
All those talks that you've given us recently about fear and anger, those being not real addictions, not real emotions, sorry.
Yeah.
Has been so helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can just click, oh, no, that's a fear. Oh, there's a grief. I've got to feel some grief.
That's right. So what you do, when you understand the truth of your psychology, which is very different to what psychologists tell you the truth of your psychology is, it's really fundamentally this. Anything you refuse to grieve, you will lie to yourself about to make a distance between yourself and your grief. And in lying to yourself, you create a fear. And in creating a fear, you now must have an addiction to compensate for the fear, because fear is an unpleasant emotion. And so you must create an addiction. And every time that addiction gets met, you'll be happy. Really happy, but not really happy, but you feel you're happy. And every time it doesn't get met, you'll be angry. But all of that could have been avoided if you stopped lying to yourself about your grief and just felt it.
Thank you.
So everyone gets that? So you can see that if I receive some of God's love, it will expose in me all the places where I'm being unloving on that point. There will be grief associated with those places where I'm being unloving, or I have been unloving, or others have been unloving to me. There will be grief there. And if I refuse to feel the grief, I will be very inclined to create a whole series of lies to avoid the grief. And those lies become the foundation of my fear. And now my fear is going to dictate my action. Yep. Paul?
So the lies is like is like telling myself that I'm not sad, that I'm afraid, that I'm something different. That,
Correct.
That's not seeing
That's
the
a lie.
truth of what my feelings at the time.
That's right. That's right. The truth of your feelings are that you have a grief in you that you're unwilling to actually process emotionally. You're unwilling to deal with it emotionally. And you'd rather tell yourself a lie than actually process it emotionally. And the purpose of the lie is to distance yourself from the grief. And the trouble with lies is that they are false, and therefore that you want to appear real. Are the false expectations appearing real. You could also say the false emotions appearing real, and they are fears. And as a result of those fears, now you're going to justify avoiding them. The fears, I mean now, not the grief. You're going to justify avoiding the fears. Because the lies you told yourself to avoid the grief.
So all in order to avoid the grief.
All in order to avoid the grief. And then of course you have to have addictions to avoid your fears. And then of course you get angry when you don't get your addictions met. So they're all the results of the choice you made right back in the beginning to not feel your grief. And every bit of love you receive from God makes you more sensitive to what's unloving. So therefore it makes you more sensitive to the grief that's in you. Because the grief would only be there if something unloving happened. Make sense? The grief can only be in your soul if something unloving occurred. And so the more sensitive you become to love, the more the grief is exposed. The more the grief is exposed, what do? If you're fighting your grief, you create more lies to avoid it. And therefore you create more fears. And more addictions. And more anger. Right? But if you feel your sadness, your grief, and you recognize the truth that comes with the love you received, then what will happen? You'll have nothing upon which to build fear. Nothing upon which to build a lie. You've now accepted the truth in your heart that that event was unloving, and you've processed through it.
And it's the pain that we're avoiding.
Of course. That's the grief.
Yes, the grief, the pain.
Is the pain.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yep.
Doing anything to run away, to get away from that.
Anything. Anything. Yes.
Desperate.
Yeah. You're willing to lie to yourself about it.
Yeah.
You know, my mum and dad didn't treat me bad. They were fine. You know, the relationship I've got with my wife or husband is fine. We get along real good. When you don't. You know, like the lies you tell yourself about, oh, my children don't seem to like me very much, but I believe they do. You know? There's so many areas where we've got a substantial amount of grief, and yet we'd like to lie to ourselves about it to avoid feeling it. Yeah? In lying, we are creating a fear. And then by justifying the fear's existence, we need addictions to live in that place.
I don't think I understand why or how we can create a fear, but is that like it's a preferable emotion? So
your fear is a preferred emotion to your sadness.
Yeah.
Everybody who has fears prefers fear than sadness. Yeah. Why would you prefer fear? What's some reasons why you might?
It appears manageable and it's a bit excusable or something. I don't know. It's like
No, there's bigger reasons, Paul. If you think about it. Anybody want to have a guess? Jack?
It'll make you avoid situations that aren't true.
yes,
You don't have to act.
yes.
You don't have to do. You don't have to cry. You don't have to be humble. You don't have to do any of that. Your fear says, I'm too afraid to do that.
You can say stay stuck in your fear.
That's right. Well, when you say stuck in your fear, it's stuck in your creation of lies. Either yours or the created ones that your parents created in you. But you're stuck in them. You're stuck in the lie. That's what fear is, being stuck in the lie. Yeah. When you have love, when you're at one with God, you'll have no fear because you won't be stuck in any lies. Does that make sense? You will accept truth straight away. You won't be stuck in any lie. So the trouble is most of us are stuck in lies, right? And by staying stuck in lies, there's a purpose to it. And the purpose is, I don't have to act in harmony with love. I justify unloving behaviour then. I don't have to act in harmony with love of others because I can just be damn selfish as I want to be. You know what I mean? My fear dictates that I'm selfish. My fear dictates that I don't care about someone else. My fear dictates all these things. That's the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to distance myself from all the unloving things others and I have done in my past. And if I can distance myself from all of that and stay in my fears, then I don't have to act lovingly anymore. I don't have to do the challenging thing anymore. I can just do a whole heap of things to meet what the fear dictates. And by meeting my fears, I create my addictions. My addictions are for the purpose of supporting my fears never being exposed. So the more layers you can put on top of your grief, the more distant you become from it. Isn't that not true? And if you can put a layer of fear on it, then you'll be distant from your grief. If you put a layer of addiction on top of that, then you're even more distant. If you put a layer of anger on top of that, you're even more distant. If you put a layer of denial on top of your addictions, you're even more distant. So the purpose of those creations, which are human in origin, whether they're your creations or parents or other people's, they're all human in origin. They're all the result of human sin. The purpose of them is to help you avoid your grief. Your grief. To help you avoid the truth about it.
So longing for God's truth would be helpful here to try to get the truth.
Well, that has less of an effect than longing for God's love. And the reason why is, without the love, you're not going to know what the truth is. Because the truth is all about the love. Do you understand that, Paul?
Not really.
All of God's truth is for the purpose of exposing love. So all truth is about love. The purpose of truth is love. Like, if you examine the truth about gravity, it's about love. Why did God create gravity? Why did he do it? To stop you from dying as soon as you're born. That's why he did it. He did it as an act of love to your physical body. That's why he did it. The truth, gravity, is about love. God's choice to make sure that you could survive in a physical form. You understand? So all truth is about love. So isn't it, how are you going to know what the truth is unless you receive this love? You're going to have to experiment over and over and over and over to find out the truth. It's a lot slower to find out truth from God than it is to receive love from God, because the love exposes the truth. Because all the truth is in harmony with the love. You understand?
Yeah, I do.
So it's easier to receive the love. And all I'm doing is telling you the truth about how to receive it. You follow?
Yes.
And the truth about when you shut it down and why you shut it down. and how you shut it down, and when you where you shut it down in your life. All I'm doing is telling you the truth of that. But it's easier for you to receive just some of God's love, and then you'll know the truth of all that. You'll know every time I feel grumpy the next day after receiving love, it's because I just don't want to acknowledge a grief of trying to detune from a grief. I'm trying to run away from it. I'm trying to avoid it. I'm trying to get control of it in some way, so I don't have to feel it. In other words, so I don't have to be humble. And so it's very important to understand the dynamic that it's easier to receive God's love than it is to receive God's truth. Like, if you think about God's truth about receiving love, I have spent nearly 15 years teaching this, 10 teaching it to Paul, and he still doesn't really get it. That's because of the love not being received. Do you understand?
Yes.
If you receive the love, you'll start getting it straight away. You'll start hearing it straight away. You follow? So the important thing is for you, I've got to have the explanation about how to receive the love, because you need to do that before you can receive it. Right? But once you've received it, focus on receiving the love, and focus on, every time that I am no longer receiving it, it's just because I'm wanting to shut down my grief. The love will trigger, it will expose every error, and every error that I have is actually about love. So it will expose every emotion that I had about what I thought love was compared to what it is. Receiving love will do that for me. Yeah? So it is much more effective to receive the love and then just go, I'm not receiving it. Obviously, I'm not grieving. Obviously, now I'm creating layers. I'm creating layers after that of what's on top of that. If I can focus on, okay, my fears are lies. I am telling myself to avoid the feelings that have been triggered by receiving some love, then I'll go a great deal ahead in my progress. But if I tell myself my fears are real, they are the false that I believe is true, if I tell myself that, I am distancing myself further and further from love, and therefore, and also further and further, the purpose of it is to distance myself further and further from my painful emotions. And the painful emotions aren't the result of receiving love. They have already been there. They're already there. I have just been less sensitive to them. They're there, and I've gone protecting them. I've gone and in that state, I'm sort of like, I'm protecting myself from everything. I'm protecting myself from everything. Now, in that state, when you're protecting yourself from everything, you can't be sensitive to anything. I receive some love, and all of a sudden I'm sensitive to a thing. Now that I'm sensitive to that thing, what am I going to do? Am I going to cry about that thing, grieve it, or am I going to revert to telling myself lies about that thing? In other words, fear it up. Make myself feel afraid about it. What am I going to do? I've got a choice, one or the other. There's rarely any other choice. It's very hard to go, I'm just going to sit here all peaceful and nice when there's all this grief being triggered. You're not going to be peaceful while the grief is in you. So you got a choice to shut it all down and make it all go away somehow. And the main method, or the only method actually humans use, is just tell themselves lies about it, which creates a layer of fear. And then, of course, it creates other layers because you don't like the feeling of fear. When you're not humble to grief, you're not going to be humble to fear, are you? Because fear is a purposeful creation to avoid your grief. Make sense, Paul?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. So while the fear is a purposeful creation to avoid my grief, how can I choose to feel fear? I can choose to feel grief. Fear is just a creation to avoid the grief. Yep. Go, Eloise.
So it's like every time you're praying to feel your fear, you're really praying to feel your lies. So you need to actually pray to feel your grief every single time.
Or pray for the truth at least
Exactly.
about your grief.
Exactly.
Correct.
And that's why I just haven't got anywhere. So I'm going, what's the fear? What's the fear? What's the fear?
Well, the fears are so unreasonable.
Yeah.
What I find when I look at each of you with your fears is I go, well, I can sort of understand why you have that fear, but it's a fantastic creation you made. it's just right on the ball with avoiding that grief that you have, you know what I mean? It's right on the money, it's right on the point, you know?
So our fears can kind of tell us about our griefs.
Did I not say that
You
fear
did.
is your friend?
You did.
And fear is your friend because it tells you what you should be grieving about.
Yeah, awesome.
Right? That was like
Forget that.
fourth or fifth presentation in this whole series.
I know, when you're in your fears, you forget that.
Yeah, so fear is your friend, right? And anger can be a guide. Remember, I also taught you that, right? Anger is your guide to your addictions. Your addictions are your guide to your fears. Your fears are a guide to the lies you tell yourself about your grief.
Yeah. Thank you.
If you want to undo human sin, all you need to do is feel the grief. All the rest are creations of sin to avoid the grief. The irony is, from God's perspective, the grief in you is not actually so much of a sin as all the other things you do to protect yourself from it. Monique?
Obviously been here the last few weeks, but so say when you become more sensitive to your sin and you do the lie, like I do the lies to not feel my grief, or I'm thinking I've got to get through my angers or my blocks to get there. What are you suggesting? Like when you can't, can you just go to your grief? You can't just go to your grief. Can you?
Well, most probably you're going to have to go to your lies. And everything began with your lies.
Yeah.
Isn't that not true?
Yeah.
So if you think about the avoidance structure, you remember in summary, the avoidance structure is your fears, your addictions, your anger and your denial. They are all higher levels in your avoidance structure. So I'll say that again, your fears, your addictions, your anger or your denial. These are your avoidance structures, right? Those avoidance structures began because you want to believe the lie.
And what would the lie be? I can't feel my grief.
Oh, you want to believe your mum and dad loved you when they didn't. Because if you have to feel they didn't, you've got a whole heap of grief about that. So you'd rather believe they loved you than they didn't love you. You understand?
Yeah.
That's an example. You'd rather believe that in the relationship that you just had, that Paul's at fault rather than you were. You'd rather believe that. So that's a lie you'd rather tell yourself. Does that make sense? So in telling yourself that lie, Paul tells himself the same lie, of course, but I'm just looking at it from your perspective. Tell yourself that lie. Now you have to create fears, false beliefs, because false beliefs are that the fears are, the emotion of fear is just you believing your false beliefs. You believing your lies. You understand? You want to believe your lies.
Yeah.
And a lot of people go, oh, but I don't want to have my fear. And they go, no, the subsequent result of you believing your lies is fear. The emotion of fear is the result of you believing your lies. And you obviously want to believe your lies. Otherwise the fears wouldn't exist. So fear is an emotion, but it's an emotion driven by you wanting to believe your lies. Just like anger is an emotion, but anger is an emotion because you want your addictions met. your anger and your fear come from what you want, not from what other people did to you. You understand?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sort of about the anger, but
They come from what you want. What you want is to avoid your grief.
yeah,
Right?
that's right.
And to avoid your grief, you have to tell yourself lies.
Yeah.
And in order, so once you start telling yourself lies, you're basically saying you want the lie to be true. You understand? So how in that place are you going to be able to play for truth? You can't pray for truth when you want the lie to be true. You know, you're not sincere. You want the lie to be true. You know, how are you going to pray for truth when you want the lie to be true? The lie's going to remain true. And you're going to go, I'm never getting through my fears. Well, that's true. You're never going to get through your fears while you want the lie about them to be true. You're just not. It's impossible. The only way you can get through your fears is to want the truth to be true.
And would the fears then just dissipate?
Sorry?
Would the fears then just dissipate?
But
they wouldn't be
no,
there.
your fears will dissipate when you're prepared to feel your grief, because your creation of fear came from your lack of preparedness to feel your grief. You understand? So you can't just tell yourself truth. You have to actually go through the grief, and once you go through the grief, then the desire to create a lie about it no longer exists, because the grief itself no longer exists. Do you follow?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I have a grief I want to avoid, I'm going to be wanting to create a lie about it because I want to avoid it.
Yeah.
But if I have a grief I'm prepared to feel, then there's no point in creating a lie about it. In fact, the point is to receive the truth about it more so I can feel it more. So at that point, there's a decision to be made. The decision is, do I want to feel it or do I want to stop feeling it? As soon as you stop feeling it, your lies begin, and therefore your fears begin. Yeah?
Yeah. So is it, if I had more faith in humility and feeling the grief, I wouldn't be wanting the lies so much?
Correct. And all of this results from not having faith in the humility.
Yeah.
In other words, there's some beliefs inside of you that are going, if I'm humble, bad things will happen. If I'm humble, people make fun of me. If I'm humble, it means I'm weak. If I'm humble, it means I don't have control. If I'm humble, it means I'm crazy. If I'm humble, you know, there's a whole set of fears that all got created to just avoid the grief. You're basically saying, generally you're saying, if I'm humble, it's the worst thing possible, is really what you're saying. The worst thing I could do is be humble. And God's going, no, the best thing you could do is, in that situation, the best thing you could do is be humble. Because if you're not humble, you'll tell yourself a bunch of lies, and you'll have a whole heap of fears, and then you'll have a whole heap of addictions, and then you'll have a whole heap of anger, and then you'll have a whole heap of denial in order just to maintain the fact that you didn't want to be humble.
Because sometimes, like a week or two ago, I was feeling angry, and then I was like, actually, I'm not really angry. Like, I just went, I don't actually need to feel this. It's just something I
Well, you want to be angry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, it was
A
just.
person who doesn't get their addictions met wants to be angry.
But it's just a choice. That was like a.
Yeah, but you're not understanding the base choice.
Sorry.
The base choice is about your sadness, your grief. That's what causes the labyrinth above. You know, all of the above comes from that basic choice you're making to not feel your grief. You follow? All the things you create from that are based upon the lies you tell yourself about your grief. All of us have got grief in us, and right from the beginning of our life, our parents started with the lies about it. Do you understand? They started with the lies. You shouldn't do that. You're going to get belted when you do that. Feeling that's bad. Feeling that's bad for me, they basically are saying. Right? Because obviously if you felt it, then they got to feel some things they don't want to feel. So they're telling you you're wrong by doing it. They're telling you you're bad. They're telling you you're evil doing it. You're making their life more difficult. These are all lies. These are lies that they began telling you, and a lot of times they didn't even know they were telling you, but they told you. And then by the time you got to a formulated age where your brain had formulated, by the time you're 7 or 8, and everything else had starting to be, you started telling yourself the same thing they tell you. Because by this stage you've got so much grief in you, you're going to have to cry for a year or two to let it go, and you don't want to. It's dangerous too. You're bound to get hurt more when you do it, is what you tell yourself, right? But now you're adults. Most of you are living by yourselves. No one's going to hurt you feeling your grief. Right? But these lies were taught to you in your childhood, and you now believe them as true. So you now believe them as fears. They are now fears in you, and you support them. You agree with them because they help you get away from your grief. As soon as I want to get into my grief, as soon as I really want that, as soon as I want to be humble, all of the rest of the labyrinth of crap that I create stops getting created. My angers will dissipate, my fears will dissipate, my addictions will dissipate. They'll all just disappear. Right? I'm busting to do a week. Let's continue after a week.